Okay, welcome to the March meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board. I call the meeting to order. We will take written questions and comments throughout the meeting. Please follow instructions on your screen and on the meeting notice. So let's take a roll call right now. I thought I was missing something, but I don't, sorry. Peter?
Good morning, Peter Goodwin. No new declarations.
Thank you. Kathleen?
Good morning, Kathleen Jones. No new declarations.
Tanya?
Tanya Heikela, I have one declaration. That is, I have been asked by California Sea Grant to serve as an external reviewer for the Delta Extension Fellowship. I'll be doing that this spring.
Thank you. Steve?
Steve Lindley. I have two declarations. I've been appointed to the Independent Scientific Advisory Board and the Independent Scientific Review Panel. This is related to the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. Those appointments are through 2026.
Thank you, Steve. Diane is, I don't think she's online yet. Anna?
Anna McCulloch, no new declarations.
Obi is online.
Yeah, good morning, Jan. Obi Sekara, no new declarations.
Kenny?
Kenny Rose, University of Maryland, Center for Environmental Science, no new declarations.
And Lisa?
Hi, this is Lisa Wenger. I have two declarations. Like Tanya, I've been asked by California Sea Grant to be an external reviewer on the Delta Extension Fellowship. And my second one is that I'm an external reviewer for the National Academy of Sciences on the National Assessment of the Nature Record.
Thank you. And I'm Inge Wener, and I have no new declarations. And before we start on the agenda, I would like to say we are here at the Clarksburg Community Church. Sorry, I pronounced that German. Pastor Sandy Adams is here, and he would like to introduce us to the place. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here today. And we want to welcome everybody who is watching on Zoom. And we are honored to host your meeting here in Clarksburg. Clarksburg Community Church is entering its, we have entered our centennial year. So we are very much a part of the Delta, and the history of this church is very much tied in to the Delta and the development of this entire area. So we want to thank you guys, this panel, this committee, personally, and commission for the work that you're doing to serve the Delta and serve the environmental needs of the Delta. And we want to thank everybody who's taken an interest to be here and for taking an interest in watching. So we hope that you have a successful, wonderful meeting, and thank you for allowing us to serve you today.
Thanks very much, Pastor. We are very happy to be here, and it's always nice to be in beautiful Clarksburg, I have to say. So I'd like to give a brief overview of the agenda today. We will discuss progress on our reviews, including a discussion on the summary of key highlights from the Emerging Climate Science Symposium. We will hear reflections from outgoing California Sea Grant State Fellow Jonathan Huang, and we will reflect on what was learned from the Interagency Ecological Program workshop that many of us attended over the past few days. Are there any public comments?
There are none.
Thank you. So I'd like to start with agenda item 2, which is the Chair's report and business matters. Delta ISB has completed its review of the draft 2026 Delta Science Plan, a shared framework that provides vision, principles, and approaches for better coordinating science in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. A copy is part of your meeting package. In our review, we organized our general feedback around the key questions posed in the Delta Science Program's request for review letter, and then provided more detailed recommendations organized around each of the sections of the plan. Detailed editorial comments provided by individual Delta ISB members are presented at the end of the document. We note that the document is well-structured and presents a concise action plan which is bold, flexible, and forward-looking. Furthermore, the Delta ISB commends the inclusive planning process and emphasis on holistic approaches, social science integration, and collaboration. There are a number of recommendations on how to improve the plan. One example is that an approach to evaluating the performance of the plan is needed. Thanks very much to all the board members for your comments, and special thanks to Dr. McKnight and Dr. Heikkila for leading the review. Any questions from the board at this point? All right, so next point is the Delta ISB chairship. My term as chair will end on August 31st of this year, and Diane McKnight will begin her term as ISB chair on the 1st of September. I will then become past chair. So to explain the process a little bit, Delta ISB has 3 chairpersons, all from the Delta ISB membership. The chair-elect, and the past chair. These chairpersons are elected by members of the ISB. Once elected, a Delta ISB or ISB member joins the leadership team as the chair-elect for 2 years before becoming the chair, which is also a 2-year term. And so is the past chair. It's a 2-year term. So upon the completion of the term as chair, the respective ISB member serves as the past chair for another 2 years before stepping down from the leadership team. So Lisa Wenger is going to be stepping down from the leadership team, and then she can, of course, be re-elected. So we will need a new chair-elect this year, and we'll be holding an election later this year. If interested, please feel free to talk to me, to Lisa or Diane about the process or about the work involved, whatever you should know. Okay, next point is the Delta postdocs. I'm very happy to report that the amendment to the Council's contract, California Sea Grant for postdoc for ISB support, has been executed. Annika Agrawal will be joining us on April 1st and will be helping with the contaminants monitoring review. She just finished her PhD in ecotoxicology from the University of Connecticut and will provide a brief introduction at our April virtual meeting. So will Alyssa Burns, who is our new ISB State Fellow. So they will both introduce themselves and their research background and interests. Oh, I'm sorry. I said that wrong. So at the April meeting, we will have a brief introduction of Annika. And at the May meeting, we will get a more in-depth presentation from both Alyssa and Annika on their background and interest. All right. Next, I'd like to update on the ongoing ISB activities. There are just a few updates. Pretty much everything is moving along. For the decision-making under deep uncertainty review, which was released at the end of 2024, there's still work going on the second product. A manuscript based on the inventory and analysis of scenario planning led by Dr. Shoko Shinbrook was submitted to San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Sciences for a special issue on post-normal decision-making. So the reviewer comments have been addressed and the manuscript was resubmitted to the journal. I am not sure when the planned publication is. Do you know anything about that, Lisa?
No, we haven't heard any further.
Okay, so It's in the works. For the subsidence review, the ISB is still working to address public comments on the draft review, which is called Science to Inform Management of Subsided Lands in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. There's also an adaptive monitoring manuscript in the works. Margot Mattson and other staff are still working with Dr. Dale to address individual comments from former and current board members. So we'll get an update, and the paper is supposed to be submitted to Ecological Indicators when it's ready. As far as I know, we have not received any public correspondence since the last meeting. Is that still true? Okay. And are there any public comments now?
There was no public comments.
Okay. All right, next point is I'm going to hand over to Jonathan Huang for his reflections. I'll give a little bit of background. So Jonathan's fellowship concluded on March 9th, but he is continuing on as a volunteer through the ISB meeting, through this meeting, to help wrap up his project. During his time here, Jonathan has been instrumental in organizing the Emerging Climate Science Symposium and helping with the Contaminants monitoring review. So this is an opportunity for Jonathan to share his reflections on what he learned during his fellowship, and we can ask questions afterwards. He will also later today present his results of his little pesticide project as part of the agenda item on the Contaminants monitoring review. And for those of us who haven't been there yesterday, that will be a nice update. Okay, so.
If I could
you have
remind
the
everyone
word,
to
Jonathan.
please speak into the microphone very closely. This room is kind of very live.
Okay.
So if it will help me out a lot. Thank you.
Okay, I was trying not to be right up to it, but that's okay. All right, Jonathan, you have the word.
Thank you, Inge, and good morning, everyone. It's good to see you here in Clarksburg. I think about a year ago, we were here as well, just across the street at the schoolhouse. So it's a nice full circle moment. And this is my presentation, my reflections presentation, titled A Year of Change in the Delta, or Delta in the Delta, for a pun. So again, when I first applied for this fellowship, I really wanted to learn how science became impactful just beyond a publication. And I wanted to learn as much of how the process worked, as much as I can within the scope of this position. And so when I started, I came in with the broad goal of as many things I could within the agency, and to learn every aspect of how science can affect decision making. And so, and so within the last 12 months, I've made a lot of connections, met a lot of people, and traveled in and around the Delta a lot. Just to kind of give you a quick summary, I've been to about 8 workshops and conferences. I did 7 site visits within the Delta and around the Delta. I had 4 presentations. I worked on 2 ISB reviews, and I'll probably use for the next decade, more or less. And to the right of that, you'll see like a bunch of pictures. Starting at the top left, that's my group of Grant State Fellows, and we were on the Bay Delta Water Tour, which is nice to learn about the Delta system as a whole, from the Delta to the Bay. To the right of that is Sassoon Marsh, where we were there with you guys about a year ago. And to the right of that is the Web Tract, Metropolitan Water District's Web Tract project. And right below that is Jefferson's Prairie. It's a vernal pool site, just, I think, on the border of the edge of the Delta. And to the left of that is actually Twitchell Island. I have to thank Lisa Marie for bringing us to Twitchell. I think we were on the way to WebTrack, and she was just like, you know, it's on the way, so we'll just go to Twitchell and check it out. And I took this panoramic of the levee, and I think it's probably one of my favorite pictures, just because it kind of symbolizes a lot of the issues that we have here in the Delta. And to the left of that is that headshot I was talking about that I'm going to use probably. And right below that is at Lookout Slough for the AM forum with ISB staff Shoko Shimbra and OPP staff Emma. And to the right of that longer picture is Lookout Slough. Oh, I forgot I have to use the clicker. If that's the slide. Okay. So when it comes to my work with the ISB, I work really closely with admin on the day-to-day needs and logistics for the ISB, including helping out with the ISB meetings. And I essentially try to help whenever I could, because I knew at the time we were short-staffed. And this can include like helping make public comments and documents accessible for online. And you probably all saw my emails of like items and events that are happening in the Delta, or I probably asked you about availabilities or to help review documents. And I know I've sent quite a lot of emails at times, so I want to thank you all for engaging with me and being responsive to my emails, and at times being patient with me. And as Inge so nicely summarized at the beginning, I worked on two main reviews. First, the Emerging Climate Science Symposium, where I was part of the planning and kind of advertising the symposium, and I also contributed to the AI-generated summary paper and the pre-symposium walkthrough of that paper, and also led the design of a breakout session and the facilitator guide for that session at the end of the second day, which was a nice experience to do. And for the contaminants monitoring review, I helped towards the end of it finalize the prospectus. I helped with the interview guide, and as well as participating in the interviews themselves. And so I mentioned that my goal at the beginning was to try everything in the agency, but I had 3 specific areas that I wanted to really get into, which are to engage in collaboration and facilitation, to work on science communication, and to essentially continue to develop as a scientist, working on synthesis, analysis, and writing. And not including the work I've done with the ISB, I've touched on each of these goals in some way or fashion. So first, I worked on 2 projects with engage in collaboration and facilitation. First is that Delta Modeling Collaboratory, and second is Adaptive Management Forum. So the Delta Modeling Collaboratory, if you were there at IEP in the afternoon, Delta Council staff, Michelle Stern gave a great presentation about just overview of what the collaboratory is. But just to quickly summarize, it's a new initiative by Delta Science Program to push science forward with a collaborative modeling system in the Delta. And they're doing this by funding and facilitating 3 simultaneous projects on the topics of salinity, CHABs, which are cyanobacterial harmful algal blooms, and tidal wetland food webs to identify common resources needs. I was a note taker for their monthly meetings and involved in the weekly team meetings for the collaboratory. I was also a liaison for the Tidal Food Webs group, along with Delta Science Program staff Denise Colombano. And this Food Webs project in particular is working in alignment with the IEP Food Webs working group. And overall, this part of the project is called for, or this collaboratory as a whole is called for by the ISB Food Webs review. And I was also part of the planning team for the biannual Adaptive Management Forum, led by the Adaptive Management Unit. And for this, for the planning of the forum, I led the coordination of a poster session where we had about 8 incredible posters. with wide ranging of topics. And I also facilitated a gallery walk breakout session to help solicit opinions and identify barriers and success of adaptive management in the Delta. And that part was organized by Dr. Shoko Shinbrat. And the forum is also something that was called for by the ISB's 2016 Adaptive Management Review. Okay, so next for science communication, I mentioned at the beginning I had 4 presentations, 2 of which are poster presentations that were advertising the ISB's food web reviews. 1 oral presentation which happened yesterday at IEP on the pesticide synthesis, which you'll hear more about today as well. And 1 legislative briefing panel that I was asked to be a part of. This was part of my master's thesis, and it was organized by CSU Coast, or CSU, California State University Council on Ocean Affairs, Science, and Technology. And this panel was organized to inform legislators and managers on the latest science regarding artificial reefs and how we could apply them for management. And then for the last one, synthesis, analysis, and writing. I worked on 2 projects as well. First is that the pesticide use and monitoring synthesis, which again, you'll hear more about. But I also worked on an adaptive management report, which is being led by the adaptive management unit. And this report will highlight progress and case studies, examples of adaptive management being implemented in the Delta. And this report is directly informed and inspired by the 2016 Adaptive Management Review and act as sort of an update to activities and adaptive management activities in the Delta since that review. The report is not quite out yet. It's slated to be out later this year, hopefully. But before that, you can also check out the recording and summary of the Adaptive Management Forum. And picture here is that the first page of that short summary of the forum. And the report will also incorporate the findings from that forum. So look out for the report later this year. And so to kind of put it together, what have I learned over the past year? I kind of split into 2 different sections. First is new knowledge and skills. Second is new insight. First, I learned a lot about Bagley-Keene and this accessibility compliance. Second is a lot of meeting planning and facilitation from working with the public meetings with you guys to conferences, to the Adaptive Management Forum, to the symposium, and also facilitation skills from agenda making to facilitation itself and note-taking. I also gained a bit of skill on project management, working with the Contaminants monitoring group, which was a fun experience to kind of build up during the year. And just a little bit of experience on contract and grant management, helping admin with some of the stuff, and as well as being a liaison for Delta Stewardship Council's Delta Science Fellows. But also I've kind of gained more insight into how agencies work. First with how interagency collaboration could look like, but also the different ways that we could collaborate through the collaboratory and learning about what co-production is through just working through the Delta in general. And last thing, learned a little bit more about how science can be incorporated into policy and management, thinking about what gets incorporated and where. And it also helped me identify where I think I could fit in that process, which kind of brings me to my last slide about looking forward. So as of now, I'm applying for positions in nonprofits, states, and regional agencies or through other NGOs. And I'm hoping to find a similar position as this, where I'm facilitating science and working on science policy interface, preferably in the marine and coastal systems, although I'm not restricted. And then as for PhD, I mentioned at the very beginning of my fellowship as well that I'm open to a PhD, and I think that still holds true today. Although I feel like I'm just more selective, I'll make sure that it's the right environment and under the right conditions. I'm not rushing into it. But before all of that, I'm gonna be moving back home to Los Angeles to help dog sit for my brother, to dog sit my little nephew, and I love him so much. But I'm also gonna be chasing sunrise and sunsets more. So a lot of people, I have to advance this. So a lot of people at the council know that I love sunrise and sunsets. I'm planning to slow down and take more time to do that. For the ISB support staff, I always begin our bi-weekly meetings with like a moment of Zen. And so this is, I guess, sharing y'all a little bit of that here. And these are some of the pictures that I've taken over the year that I think are one of my favorites. A couple of them are very memorable. The first one on the top left, that's actually a sunrise at the CNRA building, where I went to the building to grab more copies of like speaker bios for the climate symposium, because we ran out the first day. And the one right next to that, that's a sunrise from Lookout Slough, where we got there early to set up for the second day of the AM forum. And so those were very fond memories, and I'm gonna hold them really close. And lastly, to just end, I want to say thank you to California Sea Grant for having this position and being placed here, to Delta Stewardship Council as a whole, and also to you guys for all the work you've done with me and for me. But I also want to thank specific people, Dylan, Edmund, they've been huge help, and the rest of the AM unit, Shoko, Stephen, Elizabeth. They've been giving me great feedback and great support, but also the 2025 Sea Grant State Fellow cohort, and also Denise Colombano, who was actually a postdoc at a lab I worked in back at UC Davis as an undergrad, so it was a bit of a also full circle moment for that, but also the greater Delta Science program. So with that, I'll end there.
All right, well, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you so much, and I just cannot believe how many things you did in this 1 year. I thought you were mainly focused on the contaminants monitoring group, the way you herded us and guided us through all the interviews, organized and all that, and in just a very efficient manner. Thank you for that. And I'd like to invite all the other board members to ask questions or provide comments or praise. And the way you do that for the new ones is to do this, and then you need a little bit of luck for me to see it. So, so Tanya.
It's closer, since we have some background noise. Yeah, first of all, Jonathan, thank you so much for all the work you've done, and it's really lovely to see how much you've been able to achieve some of those goals that you set out, but also learn some new things along the way. And I want to say, like Inge, thank you on the contaminants review. Your persistence with us, but also gentleness is really so helpful, and those are two skills that often don't combine, so embrace those. I really loved seeing your sunset and sunrise pictures. I did not know that about you, so I love that I learned something today too. I guess my question for you is, how do you think of your future or maybe your career path differently now that you've gone through this year with us here?
Yeah, I think for me, when I came in, it was very science heavy, and I think learning about the world could make people better. But I also I think it embraced what I deep down sort of knew, which is that it's at the end of the day like a very human-centric world, and so knowledge itself is not going to help move science forward and have an impact using science, and so thinking about how we really move it into like human society and it's always not, I know I'm not the most like outgoing person, and I know a lot of scientists probably aren't the most outgoing people, and so any way I can help to kind of shift that and move and help people move science into more open and kind of better, I guess better, a more, not maybe open as a crude way to say open space. But yeah.
Wow. We're rooting for you. Obi, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yep,
You can hear me,
Yes.
right? Yeah, I really want to thank uh, Jonathan for all his support for the climate symposium. In particular, I was really impressed with the way working with Edmund, how he organized the breakout session, which was a big relief for us. And I must say, he was always calm and would attend to all the details. And I was really impressed that, and keep that quality with you when you go for other endeavors. And I would say, don't put a question mark on PhD. I would encourage you to pursue that. And finally, I was wanted to ask you, do you want to stay in California, or you're open to going to other states?
Yeah, thanks, Obey. I'm glad I came out calm because I did not feel calm underneath. But I think I'm open. Although I've kind of grew up in California, I love being in California, but I'm not saying no to any prospects of like improving myself. So
Maybe Obi is going to offer you a job. No? In Florida? No. Lisa.
Yeah, well, it's hard to follow those wonderful comments. I just wanted to add that I really appreciate the thought you put into your presentation of your time here, because it is a bit of a mystery to us exactly what you're working on. And so it was really nice to see that scope, and it was truly impressive that you've worked on so much stuff. I would say that, like others, I've just really appreciated your manner as well as your skill set. And I think that I've just seen a lot of growth in you, and I think you're really well positioned to use those skills in new environments, and I appreciate that you want to help us scientists communicate with policymakers, and I think that's a really strong role. So I just wish you the best, and thank you for all your efforts here.
yeah, thank you, Lisa. And I just want to say it's really impressive to like see how you work and how you manage different groups and different people. So I want to say thank you for that.
Anna.
So similar to what Obey and Lisa said, thank you so much. It has genuinely been a pleasure to work with you, and I agree with Obey that on the climate symposium specifically, I think that it ended up being so much better than it would have been had you not been part of the planning and the execution process. I love that photo from the top of the CNRA building, getting more bios. I think that just sort of speaks to your dedication. And so my question, which hopefully doesn't feel like a trap, is, you've had the privilege of working at the interface between this group here and a lot of the other groups in the States that are working in this area. And so I'm curious if you have feedback or advice for us as to how the Independent Science Board could be doing its work in a way that's most impactful.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Anna. I think part of, and this won't be new, but I think it's always, so I've done my master as a computational, my master's is a lot more computational, but I was in a really field heavy lab. And I've kind of had this idea, well, not new, but it's kind of idea drilled into me that it's nice to do computational work, but it doesn't matter if it's not grounded in what's actually happening in the local space. And so I think, and not that you guys aren't doing it, but engaging with the Delta and being there as a person would really help kind of move a lot of the work forward, and just people engaging with the ISB or any sort of other board and commissions.
Okay. Good advice. Well, we're here, right? So we're trying. All right. Any other questions, comments? Board? No, I don't see any hands up or any things up. So that leaves me to thank you again, Jonathan, and we'll hear more from you, and we'll be even more impressed with all the work you did after you do your presentation later today. Thanks, and all the best. I hope we'll see you in the future. All right, we'll move on to agenda item 4 then, which is reflections.
And Inge, just for the public record, there are no public comments for this agenda item.
I'm sorry, yes. That never fails.
You've been doing so well.
Yeah, I've been doing so well. Okay, which is the reflections on the Interagency Ecological Program workshop, which just took place in Sacramento over the past 3 days. So this is the annual workshop of the program, and it is an informal event held at each spring for sharing new research results that advance science important to IEP and the larger Delta science community. So very important information for us as well. This year's event was held this week, as I said, in Sacramento. And many of us were actually there, quite a few. There were the plenary talks this year focused on AI and its use in the sciences. And we heard an impressive talk by Dr. Karl Böttiger from UC Berkeley, and several people from the agencies also provided plenary talks on how to integrate AI into workflow, etc. And as mentioned before, Jonathan gave a presentation on his pesticide prioritization project, which will inform our contaminants monitoring review. And he also presented a staff poster explaining what is decision-making under deep uncertainty. So I'd like to allow some time for us to reflect and share what you've learned. So let's hear from the board about what you liked about the workshop and what you learned. Please share your impressions. Lisa.
Thanks, Inge. I just really enjoyed the IEP conference. I got a lot out of it. And one of the things that really struck me, perhaps because I spend too much time with academics, is just how sophisticated the scientists were in recognizing how their work supported a specific management issue, and they had just a deep understanding of how that work would be applied. And so I really appreciated that very applied connection. I think we learned some important things that I think will inform our contaminant monitoring review. And in particular, there were some interesting talks about how to make monitoring most efficient, to pick up on the sensitivities of when conditions were important to be paying attention, essentially, for both golden mussel and for cyanohabs. So that was very useful. And then I learned a lot about toxicology, including how cruising behavior is a thing. What that means is that contaminants can change the movement behavior of fish and lead to maladaptation that causes them to be eaten at higher rates. So I appreciated learning some of that. But I just, so beyond that, I think we also got a much clearer picture about water quality issues and the golden mussel issues, and it just is a very effective conference, and I was just impressed. So that's it.
Thank you, Lisa. Kathleen.
So this was my first really fish-focused conference, and coming from the physical sciences, I learned an awful lot. But I want to talk about the AI talks. I think that they were really excellent. It gave me a different view of generative AI as a tool instead of as a tool that we're all going to be faced with in the future, and how to use it as a scientist. So I think that it was excellent talks, and if you haven't seen the presentations, then I will suggest that you view them because they were very informative. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those comments. Steve?
I did really enjoy the real diversity of talks, and the quality, the technical quality was very impressive. A lot of that work we saw was really state of the art. I really enjoyed getting up to speed on the potential for generative AI and whether we like it or not. It was pretty clear that the younger people there are all in on this, or they soon will be. And I think I'm inspired to learn more how to start using it productively myself. So that was a cool thing. I really liked the presentation about decision support modeling that Corey Phillis and I forget who his co-author was there, using a Delta smelt model. I think there's a lot to unpack there that maybe we can circle back to at some point, about the importance of who you have in the room and how much the results can be driven by their priorities, and how important the model that underlies all of that is, whether people believe it or not. It influences things as well. So that was, I think, a really good presentation.
I agree with the AI talks. Yeah, I can't wait to make my own blog. Peter?
Thank you. I echo the comments. I thought it was really well organized, and I learned a lot. One of the things that struck me was the number of acknowledgements to the Delta Science Program. And it's a small research budget, but I think it showed how well those dollars are being spent for exploratory activities that may be difficult for agencies to take on to see if this is an important new direction, or addressing very pressing questions. So I think that was important. And the role that the science program plays in facilitating networking came through very strongly, as well as the technical expertise and the coordination of many of those activities. So I hope Chair Lee and the Council take pride when they see the depth of impact of the science program. The second thing I took away, and what we had in our review of the science plan, the importance of longitudinal tracking, it's called many things, and I think the presentation that was given by the science program in the careful thought that's going into how do you do that to measure impact. And it's something I think that the science community as a whole has struggled with, but I thought the brief presentation we heard was very optimistic for what that's going to tell us in the future. A few comments on the AI focus. I was a little disappointed that it's not going to solve the co-equal goals. But seriously, what I came away with, the ability to take out of the drudgery of a lot of work that will free up scientists' time to be creative and to do some of that deep thinking. I think that just about every talk highlighted that. And also the fact that it's not taking scientific positions, but it's an enabler. It's going to accelerate knowledge discovery in the long term. And I couldn't help but be struck by the similarity in many of the messages with the recent National Academies workshop on AI in climate. And the opening keynote of that is really worth going back and listening, Professor David Rolnick, where he was saying, it's not just a chatbot that you go to for everything, but the role of this small and intermediate AI is really going to be affecting the work that we do. And those talks, particularly that showed how you can be using something like, Notebook LM, which enables you to keep what you're putting into it private and not going back out, will overcome many of the barriers that agencies and other institutions have faced with the application of AI. And the other thing, slightly humorous, but in very fond memory of Phil Eisenberg, you probably remember his total disdain for scientific acronyms. And I learned that LES is not large eddy simulation, which is quite a sophisticated hydrodynamic modeling tool for capturing turbulence, but it's also larval entrainment study. Again, that's somewhat confusion, but I thought the studies around those entrainment and the sophistication that's being brought to this very fundamental question is going to lead to some major breakthroughs in the next few months or years. So with that, but again, the organizers just did a great job in very difficult conditions, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, for sharing that. Tanya.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of what's already been said. I think it was really inspiring to see just the emerging science, the emerging tools that are coming out, and how that information can help us as a science board be tuned into some of those emerging techniques. And I'll just reiterate what Lisa said earlier too, how valuable it is to see the type of science that was showcased at the symposium, really focusing on important management questions. And I think the contaminants monitoring review will benefit from some of the work that we saw at the IEP workshop. And I also learned a lot about what some of the new contaminants research is showing about the impacts on fisheries. And one exciting thing that I heard about was the fipronil evidence that it seems to be that some of the recent regulatory actions may be having an impact by having less fipronil in the system to affect fish. So just want to share a positive thing about contaminants. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, Edmund, you have your...
Yeah, but I also want to acknowledge that Obe had his hand up, and I also have some comments too.
I'm sorry?
Obe has his hand up online, and I also have some comments, but I'll let
Sorry,
Obe go.
Obe.
Oh, that's all. Can I go ahead now?
Yes, please, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Oh, thank you. I just want to echo all the comments on the use of AI. I remember going to the last IEP symposium. I don't remember seeing that, and the fact that they had all the plenary in all 3 days, and I think that was very encouraging to see that they place a high importance of that. And in particular, they focus on generative AI and LLM. I was hoping there would be a coverage of more into the modeling and prediction, but I think in the future symposia, it probably will be more and more covered, I think, in itself. I was also impressed with the use of technology for monitoring, whether it's fish passage or habitat, and use of multi-beam sonar. I think that was very impressive, I think. And so the only thing I'm hoping is that there would be some sort of a synthesis of all the excellent talks. I mean, I'm not a biologist, but they were interesting enough that I could pay attention and try to learn something from them. So I'm hoping there will be some synthesis of all the symposium. What did we learn from the IEP this year, kind of thing? There might be a report, I'm not sure. That's all.
Okay. Edmund?
I'll let Lisa Marie go first if you have a response to
Oh,
Obe.
I didn't see you, Lisa Marie. Sorry.
Yeah, just to, I guess, to highlight that I agreed. The technology used and the breadth of knowledge and the advanced approaches, everything was just incredible for us to see, and just targeted questions, the eDNA work, all of these things. I don't know of a synthesis that's coming out, but IEP has gone through a lot of changes in the last 5 years. And I was just thrilled to see that hunger for collaboration was still so strong. There was the interactions in the poster sessions were also just, very continuing on into the evening. So there was just a lot of exchange. And there may be hunger for a synthetic product to come out from this particular one because of the AI focus and the ability to maybe use that to create a synthesis and see what it tells us. And I really like Trin Nguyen's sort of easy entry to AI, thinking about it not as AI, but IA, intelligence augmentation, just because it's so, we're going to have to get our hands around this, and we need to make it easier for people. And he gave some nice, simple ways to move forward. So I agree with everything folks have said about watching the presentations, and I would encourage a synthesis product to come out of this as well. So thanks for that suggestion.
Thank you, Lisa Marie.
Yeah, Inge, I just wanted to highlight a little bit about the poster session. Each year, staff try to, or the Delta ISB support staff team try to promote the different ISB reviews and kind of like the findings and recommendations that come out of it. Jonathan highlighted last year's focus was on food webs and the food webs report. This year, we are working to promote decision-making under deep uncertainty and promoting what is DMDU and promoting the completed seminar synthesis that the ISB prepared. I've been attending IEP workshop on and off for the past 10 years or so. I've done tons of posters, and then IEP always does a poetry slam where you hear some singing, good poems, a rap. Just right before the poetry slam, I wasn't planning to do one. I came up with a quick poem about DMDU. I'm not going to repeat it here. It was kind of lame, but go and watch it if you're curious when the recording is up. But overall, we were able to promote DMDU. This poster was done in collaboration with Shoko Shimbrat. And then I got a fair number of questions about DMDU. A lot of folks haven't heard of it. I guess it really isn't for this audience. One of the comments that really stuck out to me was for DMDU, for the seminar series, we really didn't cover like structured decision-making. There were a few talks at IEP on structured decision-making that weren't recorded. It was on Monday. But for the poster, we highlighted structured decision-making as a potential tool of DMDU. And one of the comments that I got during the poster session was kind of like with the transition over to like structured decision-making, there was a comment just from one person that it seemed like people were talking less through a formalized process versus back then before like a formal process where the tech teams just gathered around to chat. There was a lot more conversation. That was just like an interesting observation that I had from this one individual.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that, Edmund. And I'm really sorry I missed that poem, so I'm going to have to go back and look at it, what you did there.
We're here to promote the recordings when they go live. So keep a lookout for an email from Alyssa when the videos do go live, and you can scroll through that specific.
We might have time today, too, for a performance.
Yeah. There are a lot of other creative ideas, like tying piano music to the story of salmon. Then there was a cool rap, so yeah, definitely check it out.
Yeah, it's nice to bring in some artistic vibes into the science meeting. Yeah, thank you for sharing your thought. Tanya, I think you still have your... Yeah, I did notice it this time. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. I agree, it's a great opportunity for people to get together, and I thought the talks were really, people are really trying to achieve goals, you know, really goal-oriented and very well structured. The contaminant session, I agree, there were some really great talks. It was small, as usual. But I also liked that talk that linked pesticide occurrence in fish, in salmon, to management actions or changes in agriculture that really help, you know, round up the story and help move things forward, hopefully, and tying it also into the regulatory landscape with the 303G lists, etc. And that's what's often missing from contaminants research, you know, the connection to the regulatory world, which is, it wasn't taught in my days, for sure, you know, but it should really be part of a curriculum on that. But anyway, thank you for sharing all that. Yeah. Are there any public comments? I did.
Yes, we do have a public comment. This one is from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you should have the ability to unmute your microphone. Thank you.
Hi, y'all. So I'm really glad to see some of you in person at the IEP workshop. I did have a chance to give a presentation on my synthesis of the climate literature on analysis of trends, nonlinear analysis of trends. And people said it was compelling. There's just been like a huge anthropogenically forced shift in the PDL. And I went back and developed a synthesis of the literature with Claude AI and Chat GPT helping do an editorial. But I was able to synthesize work over 45 different papers. So I'm gonna send that to you so you can take a look at it. But it really makes a difference when you're trying to build a picture from the bottom up about changes, in this case in climate. I think it has a huge promise coming forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Deidre. And I actually got to see you too at the meeting, and I'm really glad I can now put a face to your voice. I was going to talk to you, but there wasn't an opportunity. So thanks for your comment.
I'm going to be coming up this afternoon to Clarksburg, so I stayed over.
Okay. Well,
Thanks.
then we can all we can all meet. Tanya wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for your comment, Deirdre. And sorry, I didn't get to see your talk, but your description of the talk reminded me that, you know, some of this synthesis work that's coming out in the sciences is just going to continue to get easier and easier with the AI tools we have. And I know we used Notebook LM to support some of the synthesis of the literature on our climate review. And I think just as a board, since a lot of what we do is synthesis, this is something for us to really keep an eye on and to really be thoughtful about, because, you know, in the past it would take hundreds of hours of human analysis and comparisons and coding of literature to really draw out what some of those lessons are. And, you know, there's a lot we could do as a science board with some of these new tools in thinking about how we synthesize and how we dig into some of these questions perhaps more efficiently. I mean, of course, we still want to understand what's being written, and we can't just rely on these tools blindly at all. But there's some power there that we should be continuing to push ourselves forward on as a board. So
I wanted to personally recommend the Claude Opus 4.6 model. That it just came out recently, and it's now got a 1 million token window. And I was able, this is an 8,500 page paper with 45 different references. And I went through and I said, you know, this is the point, this is the literature. I hooked it up to Cite and was able to say, can you search and see if there's more references we should integrate? Because I'd done my own literature search, but it really helped to have Claude. So it was able to pull that all together and draft it, and we could iteratively refine it. And I didn't run out of context window. But I've been using AI for a year, and it just hit this. And I'm also coming out with a paper I co-wrote. There's an essay in Nature saying that we've achieved artificial general intelligence, and I co-wrote a 12,000 word paper for Minds and Machines on a category theoretic framework for AI understanding. So, and again, we co-developed it. So the ability of these tools is really significant, and I do believe we've achieved artificial general intelligence as the new Nature article states.
Thank you. I was just wondering when you mentioned the search for literature, I mean, there's always the issue with copyright, right, and access to peer-reviewed publications, et cetera, et cetera. Does an AI tool have access to peer-reviewed publications that are not open access?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's right. Yes, if it's not open access, but there are AI tools where you as a researcher, if you do have access, can upload those into like Notebook LLM allows you to upload the selected materials, or if you have your own LLM model, there are other tools. Elicit is a program that relies on AI, but you have to draw out you can either subscribe or upload your own materials as well. But there's various tools out there. Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to say for my synthesis, I would go through, if the paper wasn't available open access, I would go through and pull out key sections for Claude and paste them into the chat window. It's always you're always managing the context window, and so feeding the key sections is a way so that you don't run out of context. It's pretty easy to zoom in on those and give Claude. So I give them an entire section of the paper that was related to the synthesis we were building.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, I understand that agency folks often don't have necessarily good access to peer-reviewed literature, right? So that could be a hindrance for those people. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Complicated. All right. Any other comments? No, I don't see anything. We are ahead of time, but I would suggest we take half an hour break right now, or come back at 11 and then go to the next agenda item, which is a report out on the contaminants monitoring review. Okay. All right. So come back at 11. Is everybody back? No? We ready? Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome back to the Delta ISB meeting. The next agenda item is number 5, a briefing on the contaminants monitoring review. And I just want to give some background on that. We are conducting a review to assess current contaminant monitoring programs in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. We will first hear from Jonathan on his results of his pesticide project. He gave that presentation yesterday, but for those who haven't been able to catch it, it's a great introduction to this topic. Second, we will debrief on the interviews that were conducted so far, and then we will provide a status update on the current thinking regarding a workshop as part of the review. So I will hand over to Jonathan for his presentation. Thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you, Inge. Yeah, this is the same presentation I did yesterday at IEP, and this is a project on pesticide synthesis use. No information on monitoring yet, although it is in the title. So first, I need no introduction here. There's currently a ISB contaminant monitoring review, and there's 3 goals in mind for the review: is to first assess the current monitoring programs for strength and areas of improvement of these monitoring programs to inform decision-making on ecological risk of contaminants. Second, to understand how monitoring informs decision-making. And last, to review promising and emerging methods. And this particular study that I'm sharing is going to support goal 1 of the review. Okay, so first, I just also want to mention that in 2025, a paper was published in Science that essentially concluded that exposure data required for risk assessment were not available for 1% of chemicals with potential environmental concern in the United States. And in other words, at the national level, the existing monitoring data in the US is inadequate for conducting risk assessment for most chemicals. And so this work is partially motivated by exploring how relevant the statement is for the Delta. And so for this, we decided to focus on one specific group of chemicals, just pesticides, which are widely used in the Sacramento-San Joaquin watershed as well as within the Delta. According to California Department of Pesticides Regulation, or CDPR, there are currently 1,031 actively registered registered active ingredients in California, and they can be used for agriculture, landscaping, or for general pest control. And in terms of monitoring for these chemicals, there are numerous pesticides that are being used within the Delta alone, and they can potentially enter the waterway in multiple pathways or sources, either through runoff, through stormwater or agricultural runoffs, through effluent, or through direct applications into the waterway. But given the current resources that are available, it's realistically impossible to monitor for all pesticides. And so the first step of this would be to create a prioritization process to identify the most important pesticides for aquatic health. And this study is meant to provide information that can inform that prioritization process. And so the first step would be to calculate a rough indicator to rank pesticides that should potentially be monitored. And this indicator that we went with is based off of how much pesticides were being applied and how toxic the chemical is to aquatic life. And we're using water quality criteria as a proxy. So first, for the amount applied, we got the data from CDPR, so Department of Pesticide Regulation. They have a pesticide use report. And we identified pesticides that are being applied in agriculture only in the Delta and Suisun Marsh. And we're using the most recent publicly available database, which is the year 2023. And this database records the amount of pesticide used and the area it's applied in, and selecting for the 100 most prevalent pesticide based off acreage applied. And so for the water quality criteria, I selected the most sensitive criteria across aquatic organisms. And the criteria are taken from either literature-derived regulatory threshold level, regional, national, or international databases. And I prioritized the water quality criteria based off the list that you see on the screen, prioritizing first US EPA aquatic life benchmark, followed by literature-derived regulatory threshold level, then threshold from Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board. And then last of the list would be European Union Environmental Quality Standards or international database from the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry. And so for a quick summary of what I found, so in the top 100, most prevalent chemicals, we found criteria for 98 of those. 90 of those were from domestically derived entities or criteria, which most of them are from US EPA's Aquatic Life Benchmark. And we also found 8 from internationally derived sources. And then 2 had no information. And so to show, advance the slide, to show the initial results of this, I plotted the estimated potential risk against the prevalence or the application area within the delta. And each of these points are color-coded by the pesticide type, and with the red being fungicide, green herbicide, blue insecticide, and the purple others. And the plot is so that moving from the bottom to the top is increasing potential risk, and moving from left to right is increasing prevalence or application by area in acres. And so to highlight a few, I'm just going to show the 15 highest ranked individual pesticides, which are named on the graph. I know it's a bit small on the screen here in person, but some summary points for this is that first you'll notice that the pesticide application ranges. Some are applied more prevalently than others. The most widely applied is the lambda K-halothrone, which is the top left corner, and then the least would be zeta cypermethrin, which is off all the way to the right near the x-axis or the y-axis. And 9 of the 15 pesticides are actually considered insecticides, but we also have a couple herbicides. We have 5 herbicides and 1 fungicide within the top 15. And in fact, the 5 pesticides of the highest potential risk are all in the class known as pyrethroids, which I will note that pyrethroids are, 4 of the 5 pyrethroids are being considered in the Central Valley Regional Water Board's pyrethroid control plan. And so with that, here are some key takeaways, which is what I just mentioned. First, the most pesticides of the highest potential risk are mainly insecticides, but there are some herbicides and the fungicide. And then 5 of the highest ranked are all pyrethroids, and this is generally agreed upon by the results from Boob et al., which is that paper that I showed at the very beginning. And so to kind of end this, this is just a simple estimation using pesticide use data and effect data, and it does not necessarily reflect true risk to the organisms. And so the next step would be to consider additional factors like environmental fate to better estimate risk, as well as comparing to the list that we curated to what is actually being monitored in the Delta. And so to end, I want to say thank you. And I don't know if I mentioned this yesterday, but Janice Cook and Petra Lee of the Central Valley Regional Water Board were a huge help for finding criteria, as well as Anson Main of DPR, as well as Alyssa Burns, who's the 2026 Sea Grant Fellow. She was very helpful in finding the information when I was running out of time. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I would like to add that this was a short talk yesterday, and that Jonathan has more results than what he just showed. I mean, he also compared chronic aquatic benchmarks and criteria to the use amounts. So there's a lot more there. And he also has provided already an Excel sheet that includes some of the pesticides that are being monitored at the moment for the comparison. We are just being very careful right now because obviously this is a very rough estimator, a rough prioritization. So before we can say, oh, why aren't you monitoring this versus this, we really have to look at the ones that aren't being monitored very carefully and see if there are other reasons why why they aren't, or good reasons why they aren't being monitored, like, their environmental fate, like Jonathan mentioned, could mean that they do not make it in the water column or not in the water at all. So there are many other factors for behavior of chemicals in the environment. So just to complete, thank you. Okay, are there any questions? Peter.
Sure. First of all, Jonathan, you did a great job yesterday in the presentation. It was very clear. I was just curious with the sources you use for the criteria. Are you flagging where there's significant differences between those various criteria?
Yeah, I selected criteria based on like prioritization. So if it's in US EPA, which is generally considered the highest quality benchmark that people base their criteria off of, I didn't necessarily go into like the other sources for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious because there's probably some fairly
yeah, and there are some overlaps. Like a lot of Central Valley water boards, they selected the lowest criteria from the US EPA's aquatic life benchmark. So there are some overlap there as well.
Okay, thanks.
Maybe I could add to that too. Criteria derivation can be a huge effort per chemical. It depends on how much information is out there, so for some you might not have any toxicity information, so that makes it easy but also very unreliable. And then for others you might have tons of information that you have to evaluate as to reliability and that kind of thing. So it's we're not going to get into that.
Yeah. Just to also add to that, it's sometimes I mentioned that I selected the criteria based off organism types or groups. Generally, there are 3 groups that at least US EPA is using, which are like vertebrates, invertebrates, and plants. But sometimes they might not have criteria for each of those groups, and so in that case, I selected like what was available.
Yeah.
Obey also has a question.
Oh, Obey, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Jonathan, I also listened to your talk, it was a great job presenting it. I do have some clarification in your formula for risk. Is that a standard metric that's used, or what are the units of that? Typically, we measure in hydrology as a risk as a percentage, but it's like this is a mass divided by concentration, something like that. So is that like a standard for risk measures that if it is defined that way? Can you clarify that?
Yeah, maybe Inge can help if I'm messing up here, but generally it's not quite a standard term for risk. Normally a risk would be based off concentration over concentration, so there will be no units. But this is a rough indicator, and there have been other papers that have used a similar indicator to estimate risk. But it is like Inge said, a rough indicator.
Yeah, that's why we're talking about potential risk. It's just a first screen, essentially. So, yeah, the modeler is speaking. They're also always looking at the units. Yeah, this is a very coarse approximation just to get an idea of what we really should be looking at, based on.
Okay.
Yeah, Tanya? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Great job with this. I know it was at the very end of your time with us, and so it was a lot to probably pull together, and I know there's the next steps that you were thinking of as well, and comparing the pesticides you identified to what's being monitored was one of those next steps. Do you have some thoughts on the best kind of methodology or approach that we should be thinking about as we move forward into some of those next steps? what would you recommend?
Are you asking specifically for the comparison to monitor or just in general?
Yeah, to the comparison to monitoring.
Yeah.
Or if you have other next steps that you want to expand upon.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer, but I think figuring out what monitoring programs are there in the Delta it would be the first step, because we know, and this is bleeding into the interviews a little bit, but we know that one of the big ones is Delta Regional Monitoring Program, but we also there also probably are other smaller monitoring programs that we're not capturing just yet. So I think mapping out what monitoring program are there would be the first step, and that would be super helpful to identify, to then compare this data set to that.
I agree. Well, we just learned of some others that haven't been mentioned yet, so we need to kind of capture all of that. So.
Yeah, I think another, because like a few years ago, the Delta ISB also did like a monitoring enterprise review, and as part of that review, an inventory was compiled. So I think as the board goes through the interviews, it'll be just good to cross-check that we miss anything from that monitoring inventory, which has been somewhat merged into the science tracker data. So I think that's also another good next step for this process.
Yeah, that was a thought this morning when I read the latest email on this. I was going to go look at that and see if there are any in there that we haven't, that are not on our screen yet. So, yeah. All right, no more questions? Well, then you are released. Thank you very much, Jonathan, again, for your assistance and for your hard work. And I'm sure you'll let us know where you land. Yeah. Okay, so the next point is we wanted to debrief the board on the interviews, which have not been, we're still in the process of interviewing more people to get at all the information that's out there, and just wanted to give you an overview of who we have so far interviewed. So there were representatives from the Sacramento Area Sewer District, which is now called Echo Water Resource Recovery Facility, as I learned. And from the Delta Monitoring Program, of course, from the Irrigated Lands Program, the Bay Delta Regional Monitoring Program, which is focused on the San Francisco Bay, Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, the Delta Conservancy, Central Valley Water Quality Control Board, State Water Resources Control Board / California Water Quality Monitoring Council, then from United States Geological Survey, Astra Consulting, which was recommended by some of the reviewer or comments in the comments to the work plan, and from California Department of Fish and Wildlife / Interagency Ecological Program. So we are currently in the process of scheduling additional interviews, and I just talked to Alyssa about who we're still finalizing that. So I'd like to invite the leads, or the people who have participated in these interviews, including Jonathan, of course, to share what they consider highlights from the interviews, or takeaways from the interviews, their impressions. And so, Kenny and Tanya, please share your thoughts.
Why don't you go ahead, Tanya?
Kenny's passing it to me.
Okay.
Well, it's been really interesting to serve on, or to sit in on some of these interviews, and I certainly haven't done as many as Inge, and you probably have a better macro perspective, but a couple observations are just that there seems to be some agreement that the monitoring for what's regulated in permits tends to be fairly well done, at least, that there's adequate information, there's adequate monitoring to show compliance or non-compliance with those permit requirements. But when you move to some of these other contaminants that may not be currently regulated, getting them into the permitting process is really challenging, that there's a lot of kind of institutional and regulatory constraints on the procedures, the level of information, the kind of technical processes that are required to bring knowledge about some of those emerging contaminants into the regulatory process, and that seems to be just I think an important area for at least my governance mind and the social science piece. And also just how many contaminants there are out there that aren't currently being regulated or consistently monitored. And there's, in this kind of complex governance system, there's a lot of either inconsistency or perhaps sometimes duplication of efforts that's not really being adequately assessed or maybe leveraged to improve how efficiently some of the monitoring is done. Yeah, I think we've heard a lot about pyrethroids and some of the kind of challenges around just the complexity of pyrethroids and how those are being monitored, but also some really novel things that are being done here in California that are probably ahead of the game compared to maybe other states. Not that that's something that we're looking at, but I do think it will be important for us to consider, where those strengths and weaknesses are of the current monitoring programs. And there's a lot to dig into from these interviews are long and in-depth and rich from various perspectives. So I think we need to really spend a good bit of time thinking about a structured way to compare what we're hearing from these different perspectives and use those in conjunction with some of the other tools we have for this review, whether it's an in-depth look at the literature, which we haven't really talked much about yet, or some sort of synthesis across some of the current literature on emerging techniques or emerging monitoring tools in other countries, and then possibly, a workshop down the road and what we could learn from a more focused and targeted set of maybe expert panels and those types of things, like we've done in other reviews. So we have a lot of good information coming together already. I think the question is how are we going to synthesize all of that information, and what are the next steps that we want this to inform this review? What do we want those to look like? What's missing once we finish these interviews? So.
Yeah. Very good points. Maybe I'll chime in really quickly. I really want to point out that we are, in regulatory speak, we are focusing on the aquatic life beneficial use, right? And I am learning that not necessarily in the Delta, but other regional monitoring programs really focus on human health aspects of beneficial uses, and there's quite a patchwork of efforts going on in the Delta. Do you want to chime in, Kenny?
Yeah, pretty much what Tanya said. I think that one thing I discovered was that uh, when it's each program that's driven by a regulatory need, they're very thoughtful about how and when they sample and what they do with the information. But I beginning to think that uh, there's some opportunity to look across those different programs and be able to leverage the information uh, that no one right now has primary responsibility to do. And I think that's something that would be beneficial because someone could take the point of view of the organism who is exposed to all of these things. And yet that's not really a responsibility of a regulatory driven monitoring program. It's to look at is what you're regulating, is it okay, right? Um, and so I was impressed with how each group really thought hard and learned from experience what to do. But I think there's an opportunity there to further leverage the information by looking across. And of course, it requires resources, but it's not collecting new data. It's looking at the existing data in a somewhat different view. But
Yeah.
it was very thoughtful. Several people commented about the randomness and sampling designs. So that got through to me because statisticians love random sample designs, and that's not really the purpose most of the time of regulatory monitoring. You're not trying to estimate some population of chemicals. You're trying to make sure it's environmentally protected out there. So that was my own little insight that came out. But so I think it's I think there's a lot. I think we can make a good contribution. And the last thing is, I'm glad we're doing the interviews. Otherwise, I think if we jumped into a workshop, we would have spent most of the time trying to figure out what these different monitoring efforts were doing. And this will give us a really good jump start so we can make the workshop more focused on solutions and suggestions than trying to figure out what's going on. So I'm glad we're doing that.
Yeah, good points. And I also wanted to say that I feel that what we all want to know, how is the ecology of the delta affected by contaminants, that's really not answered by any of the regulatory processes, the connection of contaminant monitoring to ecological risk assessment or impact assessment is, so far at least, from what I can tell, in my head, not very strong at all. So, and then there's also the question of that's emerging is databases, different sets of data go into different databases, while there's one that is emerging as the main database, but not all the data fits, and they're working on a new version of that. So people are aware of this, of course. So those are the main points that are sticking out to me at the moment. But also the process, the regulatory process, as Tanya said, is very, the pace is rather glacial, right? So until a compound is on the so-called 303D list, which then leads to, so it gets there if an impairment is seen in a waterway, and every waterway gets a listing according to this. So then a total maximum daily load has to be developed, and please don't ask me in detail how that is done. But it takes years, right? I think I remember you reporting, oh yeah, we have a TMDL for mercury now, right? And it took how long, 10 years to get that? Yeah, so it's really slow, and it's compound by compound, and so those are issues that we might want to talk about in the workshop as well. So.
That and the cumulative risk, the lack of understanding around what that cumulative risk might look like on aquatic species. I mean, it seems like that's a pretty consistent theme that I've heard.
Yeah, if we get there, that's everybody
Yeah, not that
knows
we
it's
can,
there.
not that we
Yeah.
can determine that. I'm just saying it seems to be a gap that is
Yeah.
important to consider, and how, what knowledge, techniques, tools, resources are out there to maybe help push that type of understanding forward more quickly, because it is slow and cumbersome. But are there some techniques that maybe we could learn from research that's happening outside of the Delta that we could be recommending, whether it's on risk to specific species on specific contaminants, or it's around the cumulative risk issue?
Yes. It's hard to get hard numbers there, so you have to have probably a willingness to apply the precautionary principle, which
We don't do well in the United States.
Yes.
Can I finish your sentence?
yeah, I didn't know where I was going to go there. Anyway, so I hope this gives the board a bit of an idea of where we are with this. Edmund is telling me that it takes a long time to analyze each interview, so we want to have more interviews, but we are also trying to, at some point, be done with this phase and hope to have a good understanding of how things work in the Delta. So stay tuned. All right, so we were thinking, oh, sorry, Lisa Marie, go ahead.
Actually, it was a question for you and anybody else that was at the IEP meeting. Right before, maybe 2 talks before, Jonathan was one by Megan Holtz from the Hammock Lab at UC Davis. And it was a toxicity, a question of whether flow affects toxicity. And ultimately, it was a much bigger question than what you're addressing.
I saw the presentation, yeah.
Yeah, and and it was Freeport and Vernalis that inputs, and then tracking whether flow mattered. And precipitation turned out to be the bigger driver than flow, and then also fall being very low detects per unit effort and so on. And it's again a bigger question to you, but did it resonate? Does that work? Does it inform any of the assessments that you would be doing on particular contaminants?
Oh, I don't think we will do that. No, we won't be doing that. It was great to see that somebody's trying to pull all that data together and come up with, answer some questions. That was great to see. Yes, of course. And I should open it for other questions.
Well, others may be better able to comment on this, but they're not going to do any risk assessments, I think is what Inge is saying. But I think the take-homes from that talk that I saw were, and Kenny alluded to this already, they're already being pretty sophisticated about when and where to monitor. But if there's something like that where they understand that the first flush and precipitation is very important or something like that, that could become part of the monitoring recommendations. Is that right?
Well, yeah. I mean, it just depends on what the data tells you, right? I think historically that's been a problem in the Delta, that there were special studies here and there were special studies here and there were toxicity tests here and chemical contaminant monitoring there, that it's not consistent and we don't have a long-term data set. In that respect, I don't know if you caught Mike Leidy's talk, where he showed the, what's the compound? I can't think of it right now. it showed a downward trend in the tissue concentration of, what was it? Yeah, I can't think of the word right now. Fipronil, right. So that's the kind of information you want to have, or something that the San Francisco Estuary Institute has been collecting, contaminant information over the past 30 years, so you can see trends and you can connect that to what happened in the area and what happened in the watershed. So we don't have that in the Delta, and that was the big hope for the Delta RMP, right? To the Delta Regional Monitoring Program to get there. But they've not been around that long, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, you need good data to do that.
Excuse me if this is just a crazy tangent, but we heard yesterday a pretty interesting talk about developing, I'm getting all the feedback here, a sophisticated monitoring program for cyanobacterial toxins, potentially. Could that be leveraged, both the sampling and even the analytical work, to help with these other kinds of toxins?
I saw that talk too, and I was really impressed with their approach. Very structured, very thoughtful. And yeah, I mean, that could be one of the recommendations, to follow something like that. But of course, then you end up with the question, okay, where are the resources going to come from, right, for that kind of thing. But yeah, that's another thing, that there could be more cooperation, between the different monitoring programs, and that might be another recommendation in the end. I don't, yeah. Tanya?
Yeah, I guess just related to that, I mean, I've heard some consistent challenges expressed around resource constraints, which is always the case in government work. So I do think being thoughtful about how we draw in information around the prioritization process of, what locations need to be prioritized, or maybe what timing of the year needs to be prioritized based on flow or rainfall events. I don't know, but there might be some ways for us to think about, or at least keep that kind of idea in the back of our minds, that efficiency in this monitoring process needs to be front and center, but there's some perhaps new techniques or new ways to think about prioritization that could be really helpful here in the Delta. I don't know what those are yet, but maybe that'll come out of our interview analysis, but maybe we might need some follow-up work as well.
I think we might, in terms of the tools that are available, we might need to dive a little deeper into that and see what would be feasible, what could help with the monitoring efforts. Because clearly I remember the days when, our people had to go out in the middle of the night. It was always in the middle of the night when the first flush happened, and take samples, right? So it's, yeah, that kind of thing. So. Yeah, but very good point. Yeah. Any other comments or questions at this point? No, I don't see anything. Okay, so then we started thinking about a workshop, and the original idea was actually to have the workshop after we have the interviews synthesized and ready to go, and then build the workshop on the results of that synthesis. We're now thinking of holding a public workshop in early 2027, even if this analysis may not be totally completed, but I'm hoping that we will have a preliminary synthesis of that. So use the results from the interviews to feed into the topics discussed at the workshop. So we haven't And the workshop could then basically be an additional avenue to obtain input from a larger group. But yeah, we will have to think very carefully about how to direct and which questions to ask in order to really gain additional good information from there. Yeah. So that's where we are. If you have input or ideas or helpful hints, suggestions, let us know. Lisa? Lisa's smiling, so.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful plan. It seems to me that you could really almost have, rather than the final recommendations, kind of constraints you've identified and let some creative thinking happen live during the workshop, that you could say, well, we see this resource constraint, have questions like, what's the feasibility of piggybacking onto existing monitoring? Like that, you could have the people in the room able to address something like that.
Yeah. No, that's a very good idea. Yeah. Some background noise here. Okay, so that's where we are right now. We're just going to dig deeper into certain aspects and learn more. So, and then the new postdoc, Annika and Alyssa, will be, I guess, working on summarizing and synthesizing. And I saw recently in a talk that was given by another RMP, a diagram of the data flow. So I really like that. So I'm going to try and get at that and see where all the data goes and what happens to it. So something like that. Okay. No more questions from the board. So are there any public comments?
There are no.
There's some feedback. I heard it over there when you used your microphone, and now I heard it again.
It's just this room is very tricky. I'm fighting it the whole time. So
Okay.
if you guys are speaking directly into the mics and getting close to them, it helps me a lot. Also, shut off your mics if you're not speaking.
Okay.
Thank you.
We will do.
Yeah, but there are no public comments.
All right, so we are ahead of time, but
Yeah, we'll have to stick to the 2 p.m. return time because we already listed it in the notice.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll have lots of time. We will break for lunch and we return at 2 o'clock for the discussion on the Emerging Climate Science Symposium synthesis. Okay, thank you.
Go through Singapore or Europe. Anyway, we'll talk later.
Welcome back.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the March ISB meeting. And so we all had a productive and good, very warm lunch. Not the lunch, but it was very warm outside. So we're going to move on now to agenda item 6, which is a discussion of the Emerging Climate Science Symposium summary. Just provide a little bit of background here. The ISB hosted a hybrid symposium as part of its public meeting in September 25 at UC Davis. Brought together over 250 scientists, practitioners, and decision makers to assess the latest climate science and its implications for the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. Over the past few months, the ISB has been working on a summary on key highlights, and a draft was released before this meeting. Written comments will be due on April 6th. So I would like to turn it over to Obi to provide an overview of the summary and any requests or guidance on reviewing the document.
Thank you. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So real quickly, to set the stage, since we had that symposium, I was asked to give two talks about it. One is to Delta Stewardship Council, and the other one was this Secretary Crawford's speaker series, which was attended very well, and they both went well. So this summary basically is, captures what I presented at those, in those meetings. So in the summary, we have, this is a joint effort by 3 ISB members, myself, and then um, Anna Michalak and Lisa Wenger. So we basically have 3 sections or 2 sections in the state of science, and then also how the science has advanced over the last 5 to 10 years, and what are the major uncertainties, and then how the science could be used for adaptation. But I just want to mention that the summary consists largely of what we heard at the symposium from the experts that we invited. There were excellent speakers, as you remember. And we also have in the summary links to recordings and also presentation material that they had provided. So in the state of science, in the first part, as you can see, what do we know? We basically identify sort of like an abstract of what we heard that are key points that it's important for future planning in terms of future conditions that need to be considered. For example, we covered warming trends in California and globally. And one other issue is that, you cannot talk about climate in Bay Delta unless you talk about what's happening outside that, particularly around there, and even in the state of California, and in the teleconnections to the ocean conditions, and even globally. So we talk about highlights of what we learned from the symposium. And the other topic is increasing hydroclimate variability. This whole idea is the frequency and magnitudes are increasing, and the connection to the climate change in terms of increasing frequency and magnitudes of droughts and floods, particularly atmospheric rivers. And a big one is the snowpack and shifts in runoff, basically the loss of snowpack due to warming and shift in runoff characteristics. The emerging hazards, basically rain on snow and the result of increased flooding. And obviously the one that we've been talking about probably for some time is the sea level rise, and then also fire, watersheds, and ecosystem impacts. So we felt like these are the key points that, going forward, we need to make sure that, agencies need to make sure that the planning that they do will have future scenarios, future conditions that are characterized by the tendencies in these factors. Then we also identify how science has advanced. For example, subseasonal forecasting, better understanding of atmospheric river events and changes, and flash droughts, particularly this topic of hydroclimate whiplash. We have a better understanding of that, and the recognition that the models have improved, and the potential role of AI in the planning exercises or future activities. And also finally we understand better how the transition from low snow or to no snow conditions. So these are the improvements that have happened that we heard at the symposium itself. There are major uncertainties we identified. I don't know if Anna, you want to go ahead and talk about them, or?
Sure, I can summarize them briefly. I mean, you can also look at them in the draft report, but what we did is we compiled the major uncertainties that were identified throughout the workshop by speakers and participants. And at a very, very high level, and we can go into more detail, we grouped them under 6 different categories. The first is uncertainty in Pacific decadal oscillation and El Niño southern oscillation behavior under warming. The second one was uncertainties in the dynamic versus thermodynamic drivers of precipitation change. Next, we had the recurrence potential of medieval scale mega droughts that have occurred in the region in the historical record, but have not been seen in recent decades and centuries. Then we talked about infrastructure vulnerability to compounding or sequential hazards rather than individual hazards. We talked about ecosystem tipping points and consequences. And then lastly, we also talked about limits of models and decision-making frameworks, which then led into the last major section of the report that talked about how we can adapt and flexible forward-looking planning that Lisa Wenger led the writing on. So I'm not sure if maybe Lisa, you want to jump in and talk about those sections?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anna. Yeah, so again, with that theme that we were pulling together what we heard at the workshop and grouping it into themes, that in response to these changing climate conditions, we are looking at, what does planning look like when it's flexible and forward-looking, and not just dependent on historic conditions. How do we link improved near-term forecasts to management models? And they're mostly thinking about the FIRO work and FLEDMAR. Multi-benefit risk mitigation approaches, and people talked about upper watershed restoration as one of those options, and institutional and collaborative strategies that just covered a lot of different territory. And then we tried to sum up what people were suggesting could be done differently in the future. And there's even there's a table. I won't actually read all of them, but you can get the idea that there's kind of the way we traditionally do things, and then there's a way to move to a new type of management. And I think some of the key issues here were really incorporating extremes and not using averages when thinking about management. And of course, a lot of that is already going on, but the question that came up a lot was, are they looking at the new kinds of extremes and not only things from the nearer term historical record? So those were some of the issues. Maybe we can scroll a little bit further down. So again, I don't think it's worth reading all of these, but the idea that we want to develop multi-benefit water storage solutions, and then really think about optimizing the benefits of nature-based solutions, and just more generally thinking about, how can we get multiple benefits out of how we manage water? Is there a problem? No. Okay. And then maybe just to add a little bit more to the improved coordination and institutional partnerships, there was many suggestions to just work across agencies and maybe share scenarios so that some types of outcomes could be compared, not necessarily standardizing everything, because there's benefits to having diversity of approaches, but at least some core scenarios that might be shared to better understand some risks. So that was some of what we talked about.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Lisa. So, given that we have all the recordings and also presentation material, we didn't provide a lot of details on the state of science. So one thing I would like to see, other board members or colleagues do is do we have to add additional material to make it clearer? If you have any suggestions, please provide some details. And staff already gave us some comments, so we'll address both of them at the same time. In terms of going forward, once we finalize, we're thinking of writing a perspective article, hopefully focusing on things that could be useful in the future for practitioners or agencies, and this trying to bridge the gap between the science and practice. So that's kind of a summary of what we have here. Inge, I don't know if there are any questions. You'll be happy. I know you didn't have enough time to review them, but hopefully you'll have between now and April 1st.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Thanks, all of you. Do you have any guidance on for the reviews. Any
Like,
particular
yeah,
questions you have, or, yeah.
I think, like I mentioned, if you think, if there is any additional clarification or material that needs to be included in any of the section, we would like to get that feedback so we can improve the next version of it. That's, does that provide a good summary of the symposium? Many of you attended that. I think that's about it, what I have at least.
All right,
Maybe
Anna?
maybe just one more thing, whether the balance in the level of detail across the various sections, does that seem about right? Does it seem like we are glossing over details in one section but diving really deep in another? Just does it read like a fair representation of the material that was covered at the workshop from the perspective of those of you who are all there as well?
All right, all right. So do any of the board members have questions? Kathleen?
Yeah, I have a question about the state of the science in the first topic. What do we know? To be honest, I haven't read the whole thing, but I read that section, and it struck me that in summarizing what each speaker said, there was a lot of repetition, because whenever you talk about snow melt, of course it has to do with warming trends. And so I was wondering if you want to avoid that kind of repetition, in which case a fair amount of rewriting should be done, or do you want to make it clear that this is a summary of what each speaker said?
Do you have a response to that? Immediate response?
Well, I think I will take another look at it, but I think up front, maybe in the first paragraph, we did say that this is a summary, but we'll go back and take another look at it.
So just provide that comment.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that it's a summary of what the speaker said, not a summary of the whole sessions.
I think that's true.
That's true?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. No, but no protest, so, okay, that's true. Steve?
Well,
Yeah, I think I have essentially that question, whether the assertions in the report, which I did read, and it was a really nice read, are they strictly drawn from the presentations, or is there some other knowledge that we have all picked up that may have bled into there? And if so, is that a problem, or should that be clarified?
I would.
Go ahead.
No, I would say, largely they were what we heard at the workshop. And if there is any additional information that we included, there probably will be not very many, but we can clarify that. I think to kind of make the argument complete, we may have used other information, but we try not to review all the papers that are around that topic. I think we can clarify that up front if necessary.
Maybe I'll just add that we are still, and as you know, thinking about other follow-on products that might come out of the workshop. And so this one was really meant to be primarily a summary of literally the discussions that took place while we were there.
Any other questions? I don't see any raised hands. Deidre, public comments?
So it's good to see the board in person. I know I've participated in many Zoom meetings. So this is an incredibly important product, and I think you highlighted some of the key uncertainties that need to be resolved. I really focused in on the Pacific Decadal Oscillation in my own work, and you don't reference it, but Cook et al. Found that there was a megapluvial from 78 to 99, rightfully during a positive PDO, and it was the wettest period in the southwest region, including California, in the last 1,200 years for June, July, August soil moisture. And following that, we had the mega drought from 2000 to 2022. That was the driest period in the 1,200-year tree ring record. And they found that 19% of that was previous work was due to increased temperatures, but there was also reduced precipitation, and you can see it. I brought this out in my talk at the IEP workshop. But the reduced precipitation is amplified by the increased temperatures in the watersheds, and you get much less runoff. So that's why the PEO shift is so important. And regarding the medieval megadrought, I don't know if you know, but there was a simulation of what happens to State Water Project and Central Valley Project reservoirs in a repeat of the Renaissance mega drought, and it's pretty staggering. So that question, that gap in the literature has been resolved, and the question is, are we heading to something like that because of the negative PDO forcing? And I did just send you a 8,500-word literature synthesis on ocean forcing in the Northwestern Pacific and why. I think it provides a pretty compelling picture of why we're having a negative PDO. It's increased ocean heat transport. That wasn't in the workshop, and that's something that the leading oceanographers really need to look at, and I'm hopeful to talk with more of them going forward. But there's a whole body of recent work starting about 2022 and going through 2026 really changes our picture fundamentally, including Jeremy Clavin's paper that Daniel Swain highlighted in his talk. Daniel Swain saw the implications of that study, and it was not just by Clavin's, it was by Clara Desser, who's leading researcher at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, Amy Clement, who is down the hall from Obey and is a leading researcher on decadal variability in the Pacific and others. So that was just a landmark study, and it really, we're in the middle of a paradigm shift about understanding the PDO, and it has everything to do with precipitation in California. So thank you.
Thank you, Deidre. Your voice got softer and softer and softer, and I hope. Oh yeah, okay. I'm sorry. Would anybody like to respond to Deidre, or are we just
No, maybe I will. Thank you, Deirdre. I'm glad to see you at least on video. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person finally. But I was there for your talk at the IEP. Actually, I was listening to it. It was interesting. Like you said, Clavin's paper, I have it and I have read it. I think the key is if there are some robust signals of changes like this, how do we make sure future conditions incorporate that in kind of an analysis of scenarios or plans? So that's something we should be focusing on. So I appreciate your input on this, the teleconnection issue.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. I don't see any more raised hands. So maybe next steps. So please, board members, send your written comments to staff by April the 6th, which is 2 weeks from, no, a little more than 2 weeks from now. After, we will then have a discussion at our April 1st meeting, which is our April meeting, which is only 2 weeks from now, I guess. Yeah, so pretty soon. All right. Are there any more public comments, Edmund?
There are no additional public comments.
All right, thank you. Well, agenda item 7 is a discussion or some brainstorming on a review on nature-based solutions. So I'll just provide background. At our planning retreat in December of last year, we started brainstorming on possible future reviews. Some of the topics that have risen to the top include harmful algal blooms, structured decision-making, and nature-based solutions. So the leads have been assigned to explore the scope of these reviews, and this could involve conducting scoping interviews with experts, working with staff to organize informal presentations to the board, attend events of interest related to the subject matter, and if we then want to move forward, a prospectus would be developed that describes the scope of the review. So there were other topics discussed at the planning retreat, and some other ideas that were prioritized include collaborative science. There are recommendations coming out of the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project operations review by a committee of the National Academy of Sciences led by Dr. Goodwin on this topic. The idea is to see what kind of feedback is received on the recommendations from this review, from this National Academy review, before moving forward on this. And there was talk about the follow-up to the Emerging Climate Science Symposium. So we decided to wait until after the products of the first symposium are complete to provide better direction on what this could entail. So today we would like to focus on the review on nature-based solution and provide the leads an opportunity to share their latest thinking, which is just very fresh, I guess. Peter, would you like to take over?
Sure. Thank you, Inge. And Kenny, Rose, and Anna, we've been thinking about this since that discussion back in December. And perhaps I'll just give a very brief overview of what our thinking is at the moment. And then Kenny's been working on a big project on the East Coast, so he'll just mention some of those activities that could be a good guide or contributor to what we're doing here. And then Anna will add both her thoughts and then where we might go with the next steps. So first of all, I think it's really important to recognize that California has a long history around these concepts. It was one of the first areas in the world to move away from flood control to flood management. Very big change. It was then working with nature. It was then engineering with nature, and now we're into what's known as nature-based solutions, which builds on these concepts. But there's an awful lot going into this at the moment, and I think it's really inspiring to see how this concept has taken off across California, across the US, and around the world. And that was one of the things which really struck us in the last few weeks when we were talking about this. So whatever we do, and I will probably talk about this, it's important that we have a really well-defined scope because it's such a huge area and there's so much going on. We need to define where this could be helpful. So what I'm going to do here is just list a few of the extensive activities that are going on that have just happened in 2026, just to show you how fast this field is moving. So in January, California, which I think is really an exemplar for the implementation of NBS at scale, and that's really important. Evidence of this is the multi-billion-dollar investment that the state's making, and the summit that was held in January that's recording, and I'd certainly encourage people to listen into that. And several things came out about this. So this is nature-based solutions specifically to help the state meet its climate goals. And the first report was released just in time for this summit that showed the progress that the state's already made. And it's a really nice glossy summary of where the state's going, what's been achieved towards those goals. Also, I think that was very notable. The summit was hosted by Secretary Crowfoot, and he was around during the entire day. He moderated a lot of the discussions. And lined up in that summit, it was all of the leaders, the different agencies that are contributing to this effort. So it's a really good perspective of how seriously the state's taking it and where it's going. And then as a specific example of nature-based solutions, UC Davis, the science program, and the Delta Conservancy hosted a Blue Carbon Summit earlier this month that again was very, very informative, that was looking at carbon sequestration within the Delta. And of course, our lead scientist, Dr. Wyndham Myers, is a leader in this area, the lead author of the Blue Carbon Primer that many of us refer to. So that's just an example of what's going on at the state level. At the national level, a few years ago, the National Science Foundation, anticipating this new trend, funded some really large programs that are now contributing to the base of NBS, such as the Coasts and People program. And Dr. Rose will talk about one of these very large projects that has been completed and some of the publications that are coming out of his group and Ming Li's group. Another of these large NSF programs spawned a series of National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine workshops around NBS. And the latest workshop was last week. It focused particularly on the Gulf issues, but many of the issues that were discussed, like private-public partnerships, really have national relevance. And also, perhaps most importantly, one of the big challenges of implementing NBS is the lack of engineering guidelines. People will revert to the standard engineering manuals because of liability and many other issues. But I think very importantly, the American Society of Civil Engineers is just at the very beginnings of starting an initiative by bringing in experts from the engineering world to develop engineering guidelines for NBS. And I think this could really be a game changer for particularly perhaps the smaller government entities and things that struggle to make an adequate balance between the choice of gray infrastructure or green infrastructure. And internationally, we were talking about this, many countries have very extensive programs, the UK, the Netherlands, EcoShape, and everything that spawned out of that initiative, and Brazil. But there's this pervasive effort to engage industry and the private sector, just as was spoken about in the summit, that government can't do this alone. And it's one of these programs that multiple partners, multiple benefits can come out of that. And just a few of the examples, again, this year, the World Economic Forum published Finance Solutions for Nature Pathways. UNEP published State of Nature Finance 2026. And that's just a small selection of some of these international findings that have come out. So there's an awful lot going on. Dylan may want to just comment on the Restore America's Estuaries, which is coming. So perhaps I'll turn to Dr. Rose now. Maybe you'd like to talk a little about your project with Dr. Ming Li and some of the findings that you've just published.
Yeah, sure. So that was a NSF project that Ming Li at Horn Point was the lead PI. And the whole idea there was to create these hubs so that lessons learned and practices can be exchanged quickly among people rather than through the somewhat slow publication route. And the other route is through, local technical reports, which people aren't fully aware of. So they created these hubs. One paper that we wrote was an annual reviews, I think, of marine science. How do you measure performance of these structures? And we can have the link. And there's lots of ways to do it. And there's lots of possible benefits ranging from carbon sequestration to fish habitat, birds, ducks, recreational opportunities, education. There's a huge table we came up with, and any particular project really focuses on 2 or 3 of those. But when you review the literature, every one of those I named was cited somewhere. And so, there were other products from that NSF-funded project, but this was one that was particularly relevant to here because a lot of people are struggling with. One is the design, but two is how do you measure how it's doing. The second aspect is I have funding from NIFWF, the National Fish and Wildlife Federation, to develop kind of a best practices for one of the co-benefits. There's lots, but particularly habitat, be it diving ducks, terrapin turtles. Remember, I'm in Maryland, and a whole bunch of fish and shellfish and oysters and etc. And there, I'm involved with designing, working with the engineers for the city of Cambridge. It's about a mile and a half long, and maybe everything's in English units when you go in front of city council. And it's about maybe 100 feet out, and it's a whole mix of habitats. And it's a hybrid structure, which is, there's a wall for flood protection, and there's a living shoreline between the river and the wall. And I'm trying to design what arrangement of marsh, beach, riprap, various habitats do we want to set up so that we still get the flood protection, but on top of it, we optimize our other co-benefits like habitat, recreational, etc. So NIFWF is funding that with FEMA, and the idea is to test, give our best practices a test run with this actual project, and all the way through permitting, in fact. And there's people, Lisa has a student who's working on how do you get these co-benefits into the benefit cost analysis, all these things. The idea is that right now, there's a lot of knowledge out there based on experience and what was done last time that really should be captured so that we maximize what we're trying to achieve with the co-benefits. And it's right now done kind of local, often with places and companies who are not really not in charge of disseminating the information, what worked, what didn't work. So there's this gap that we're trying to fill. I suspect it's somewhat similar in California. It seems to be all over. And so the idea is to elevate the science of the co-benefits so that there's efficiency. So that's kind of why I got interested in helping Peter and Anna on this, because I'm hoping we can really get something done quick so I can use it when I go next time I go in front of city council and try to explain what we're doing. But I don't think it's going to work quite that fast. So, but I think there's a gap there that we could fill as the science advisory group that also has engineers, which is a science, and economists, and I think we could help. So anyway, that's a very quick version of my interest, but also what role I think we could play as the ISB in this area.
Okay, thanks, Kenny. And so perhaps we'll let Anna go, and then if the staff had anything to add, and then Inge, I'll turn it back to you to moderate the discussion. But Anna.
Thank you. And so the last thing we wanted to talk with you about before we open the discussion is our initial thoughts on how we would kick off this effort. And as Peter has mentioned, there's a tremendous amount of activity in this space. And so one of our guiding principles is how do we do something that is not redundant or repetitive of what is happening. And the other is that the work that we do be really place-based and relevant to the work that is happening in the Delta. The initial thought we have is, given the tremendous level of activity in this space, we were somewhat concerned about how do we really wrap our heads around everything that is happening in this space, and also how these various workshops, reports, and so on are applicable and relevant to the space that we find ourselves in. And so one of the ideas that we're exploring is inviting the leads on some of these efforts that Peter has mentioned to actually come to us and give us a summary of the outcomes from their efforts, and to the extent that they are able to think about it already through the lens of California, through the lens of the Delta, through the lens of what they think might be most relevant across the work that they did. We think that will be not only efficient, but potentially allow us to glean some insights or some thoughts that might not be in the formal reports or whatever other products are coming out of those workshops. So that's one set of conversations. The other part is we need to think about it from the perspective of what's genuinely helpful to the various agencies and groups working within the Delta system. And so in parallel, we also want to organize a set of conversations to understand where is it that the work that we could do as the Delta ISB would genuinely be value added to the work that is happening here. And so there again, we are currently thinking about this as a series of conversations or webinars where we would engage with practitioners and with groups within the agencies. We had a bit of a discussion as to how to space this out. We thought about we could run as a bit of a, almost like a seminar series as we had done with the DMDU, but we were concerned that we would never catch up, because if we spent a year running these seminars, there'd be 24 more things that we would miss out in the interim. And so we're inching towards an idea of having it happen within a relatively compressed amount of time, maybe a month or two, or maybe potentially if we could get it to align, do almost a back-to-back set of conversations over a day or a couple of days, if again that's feasible from a practical standpoint. So maybe I'll pause there, but those are initial thoughts on how to really zero in on what are the gaps based on these existing efforts, and what are the needs from the perspective of those who are actually engaged in this work within the Delta.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. That was very interesting. So I'd like to open it up to discussion questions from the board. I have a question. So are you aware of projects like that are actually ongoing in the Delta, or is that going to be part of what you're trying to find out?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot going on in the Delta. It has been, it might not have always been known as NBS, but everything from subsidence reversal and a lot of other large-scale projects, multi-benefit, multi-partner type things. So I think this is one of the things we look at. And one of the questions which was raised, do we focus this around individual projects, or do we look for more general guidelines? Because I think there are some exemplars out there, or a lot learned because of the monitoring that have been done around some of these projects. Your YOLO bypass comes to mind immediately.
And maybe I'll just add, and this is also, of course, a learning process for us. But one of the things that I'm certainly curious about, and we talked about a little bit, is how consistent is the definition of the criteria that a project has to meet in order to qualify, whether formally or informally, as NBS. And so even among the projects that are currently ongoing with the Delta, which of them represent NBS type approaches, which of them, for lack of a better term, self-identify as NBS versus not, and how consistent is that? Is more consistency valuable, and so on? So I think the answer is we don't know at this point, but frankly, I suspect there's many projects that have not been labeled as such, and whether or not they are NBS depends on which definition you use, right? We talked about, in one of our conversations, we talked about different approaches to river restoration, and are those NBS or are they not? And it might depend on the details of how the projects are framed and how the goals are defined, for example.
Okay, can I ask a follow-up question? So, okay, so if there's so much going on, so are you going to review these projects? Or are you trying to identify additional opportunities or?
So definitely identify additional opportunities, and definitely there is a lot going on. So this was our initial thought, is how do we, given how much is going on, how do we make sure that any work that we do in this space isn't just duplicative of efforts that are already ongoing? And this is where this idea of inviting the leads on some of these ongoing efforts to tell us about the main takeaways from those other efforts and the extent to which, from their perspective, they think that work may or may not be applicable to the context of the Delta would be the first step. But certainly, and I guess, Peter, you should jump in, but certainly I don't think we view this as a process of summarizing the work that is ongoing. We're thinking about it from the perspective of what is the gap between what has been done and what is needed in order to make these types of solutions more achievable and more effective within the context of the Delta system.
No, I think that's exactly right, and I think that's the reason to go and talk to some of the people that have the responsibility for implementing these projects. What are the gaps? And because we do have a limited bandwidth, just with the resources we have, so where can this effort be of most use, to the state agencies, the federal agencies, the NGOs, the people that are putting these projects on the ground?
Yeah, and it also depends on what you're trying to solve, right? So
Right.
you have to, yeah. So is it climate change related? Is it habitat? Is it, yeah. Okay. Tanya, sorry for taking.
Yeah, thank you all for brainstorming on this and for sharing with us kind of your initial thoughts. It sounds terrific. A couple, I guess, clarifying questions and then maybe one bigger question. Clarifying question maybe for Anna is just in the inviting these kind of existing efforts. You're thinking nationally, like folks who are working on kind of synthesis type efforts and bringing those folks who are already trying to synthesize knowledge to say, yeah, what are we learning nationally? Is that?
Yes, I'm not sure if it has to be just nationally.
Or
It's also, it could be at the state level as
Or
well, right?
state,
So some of
okay,
the efforts
yeah.
that Peter mentioned in his opening remarks, part of what we're also curious about in the near term is to make sure that all of the relevant efforts are actually on our radar screen. And so certainly there's others that Peter didn't mention that people are aware of. They could be sent to Edmund, for example, and then he could keep us apprised if there's a longer list that we should be paying attention to. But I'm not sure, Peter and Kenny, what you think, but I don't think it has to be national. It can be at the state level, or it could be international as well.
Okay. And then I guess that raises another question about, is that, and maybe you just don't know, there's a little bit of like, we have to iterate and figure out what we don't know first before we figure out what we want to focus on. But I suppose knowing that there's a significant amount of effort happening in California, there's a lot of, I mean, the scope could be really big, right? I mean, even just thinking about wetland restoration is one example. We know how big that scope is. So I wonder if some of this is leaning towards looking for examples that aren't being used in the context of the Delta that could be, or mechanisms for helping us really build some of those co-benefits more quickly, or more, overcome some of the potential barriers that exist. I don't know, or maybe this is where the conversations with the practitioners need to go, but it feels like it could take, because the scope is so large and messy, it could take a long time to get to the point of what's going to be the value added here in the Delta. I'm just putting that out there as acknowledging it. Don't expect to have a solution for that right now, unless you want to respond.
No, I mean, I think that's right. I don't know.
Yeah.
Others can chime in, of course, but you're right that we're at the very early stages of thinking about this, and we'll have to see where it leads. Maybe the endpoint will be a set of common threads that are more application agnostic but relevant to the Delta system, or maybe we'll end up zeroing in on one or two types of applications, and that would be fine as well. I think at this point, I guess speaking for myself, I don't feel that I understand the full landscape sufficiently to answer that question, but I'm sure we'll inch towards that in the coming months.
Yeah, cool. Peter, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's absolutely right, and it doesn't all have to be done in one review. There may be elements of this that can be broken off because they're more urgent or as a way to start. But I think this would come out of some of those discussions.
Okay. I think that those are my questions for now, but yeah, I'm excited to see where this goes.
Yeah. Obi, you had your hands raised.
Yeah, thank you. This sounds like an exciting project, but I just wanted to, I assume there will be a prospectus for this effort at some point that might basically define the scope of what we are trying to do based on the question that were raised. In terms of the scope, I mean, you have, and I think Kenny mentioned flood protection benefits, and then you have these core benefits of the habitat. And this particular issue that I always think about, the nature-based solutions might be good up to a point in the future when the climate conditions are changing. So up to what point they might work? I was curious, will that be part of the discussion, particularly in terms of handling natural hazards in the future or flood protection, or will this be mostly on the core benefit side, or both? And one last thing, Peter, the Corps of Engineers has the engineering with nature. They would be another group to talk to, I think.
Yeah, to the last point, absolutely. For those of you who aren't familiar with what Obe mentioned, it's a really nice book capturing many of these projects that have been implemented around the US. It's a really nice glossy publication.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in regards to your first question, Obe, I think we'll just wait and see. But with climate change, what could well come out of this is how do you logically compare gray versus green infrastructure? Because often it's the green infrastructure, the engineering with nature that could be more sustainable in the long term for a lower maintenance cost. And I don't want to presuppose what we might hear from agencies on this topic, but that seems to be, certainly in the engineering community, an issue which comes up time and time again. But that's a good point. We'll note that for sure.
Tanya, I thought of some more questions.
Sorry, Steve. Steve first.
I'm sorry. I'm so inattentive.
So as I've been learning more about this, I'm increasingly appreciating the need to control the scope of this because there's a lot to think about. But in the Delta, it's often hard to think about in isolation, but I think in terms of nature-based solutions, it may be especially challenging that a lot of the solutions that have a natural basis may be in upper areas of the watershed. Is that going to be in bounds, or are we going to want to save that for later? Because there was a lot of excitement about that at the climate workshop.
Yeah, I think we certainly agree with you that, and getting back to Obe's point, that the prospectus or the scope of what we do needs to be really clearly defined. And with those types of issues, I would say let's see what comes out and perhaps prioritize it, because upper watershed management looks like it's going to have some pretty significant benefits down the line, but it's expensive to do most of those actions. Let's see what comes back and see if we can then prioritize what we might do perhaps in a first phase.
Tanya, you have to wait. Lisa had her thing up too.
Thanks. Hopefully this doesn't take us in too far a direction from where Tanya wanted to take us. But so I liked some of the comments that Kenny was making about co-benefits, and I wonder, and you mentioned the YOLO bypass, and I do not know for sure this hasn't been done, but it does seem to me it would be very useful to have a clear-cut view of how these older projects have fared over time and what the costs of maintenance are, if that isn't already done, I don't know. But, so that's one thing I wanted to say. And the second thing I wanted to comment on was Anna's comment about defining nature-based solutions. I've had a lot of conversations about this in working with the folks at the Corps of Engineers who, to my understanding, are the ones that actually coined this term, nature-based solutions. And so there were two competing definitions, and again, you may already know this, but one was infrastructure that mimics natural functions, and then projects that blend nature, actual nature, with gray infrastructure to the extent necessary. And I just do think it's very important that we clarify that particular distinction, because if we can just mimic nature with gray infrastructure, it does suggest we're not creating the same kind of incentive to protect nature. And so that was a conversation we had a lot. But I do think but I'll also sort of advocate for the opposite, which is agencies are going to want to define it in a way that's useful to them, and it's possible that the idea of standardization is not going to work. So, thank you.
Do you want to respond to that, or do you just want to note?
No, I think that's absolutely right, and we spoke when we were going through this, the importance of just defining nature-based solutions, and yeah, different groups do use it with a slightly different scope, so that may be one of the things that the agencies say would be a worthwhile endeavor if it's not already been done for the state. But I would say that in that the series of workshops that they're running, or summits on different elements of nature-based solutions, it really is at scale. And they're looking landscape scale, very, very big initiatives. So it will be interesting to see how the state's using that term and how well it's defined.
All right. No, sorry, I cut you off earlier, but Tanya, go ahead.
No apologies, no apologies. No, just following up on Obe's point about the climate change effects potentially on some of these solutions, and whether or not they're going to continue to produce the benefits that maybe they were designed for. This made me think, as a science board, one of our missions is to review the science around the adaptive management of the Delta towards our co-equal goals. And I guess I would encourage us to kind of keep that spirit alive in this effort towards thinking about, what the focus could be, or where some of the scope would be. Partly because, as I heard Peter mention, if we're spending billions of dollars on these types of solutions, how do we adaptively manage them to continue to ensure that those investments that are being put in are going to be achieved in the long run? And I don't know where the science is on that, but it seems like that should be at least some aspect of our focus for here in the Delta, because it's not just, what's being done or where could we do things differently, but how do we think about this in the long term for successfully managing the Delta, given the resources that are going in. So.
Okay, good point. All right, Kathleen. Okay.
Yeah, so following up on what Obi said and you said, I think that looking, the problems in the Delta are long-term problems, and the solutions need to be long-term solutions. And so one of the things that it's really important for us to do with this is to look at the solutions that are provided now, for nature-based solutions that are provided now, are they suitable to work in the long term under climate change? And how early do we have to implement those solutions in order for them to be effective? Mm-hmm. So I just put that out there.
Maybe I'll just comment that I really like that framing. It's stating a similar point to what Obe had said in terms of how resilient are these solutions in the context of climate, and what you framed it more as, how do we design them so that they are resilient and that they do operate on the timescales that we need them to be functional over. So thank you.
Perhaps just to add to that, I think it's important to look at the other side too. So you put in grey infrastructure, often that doesn't perform up to its original design because of climate change or change in sediment regimes and things like that. So we'll see what the agencies say, but there's many examples around the Delta and here in Northern California of projects that didn't get close to performing on flood control and other issues. So yeah, it's really important to do, but I think you need to have a framework where you can objectively compare these different solutions, and the amount of grey that goes into the green is important. He said, looking at the economists.
Well, if I may just build on that a little bit. Yeah, and sometimes the goals are more short-term. So we should also recognize that, people may want a wetland that only lasts 30 years for various reasons. So it's possible there's a mosaic here that fits all the needs.
I have a comment.
Sorry.
Yeah. One. It occurred to me, we just had a discussion on DMDU. There might be an adaptive pathway strategy to addressing climate change, even in nature-based solution. Maybe in Kenny's project, they can buy some land so they can move that habitat upstream at some point in time. Just thinking out loud, there might be a role for adaptive pathways even in NDH solutions, so they could be longer lasting or will serve more years into the future. Just thinking out loud.
That's all right. Do we have any more questions, comments from the board? Lisa Marie. I have to look in too many directions. I apologize profusely. Okay.
Yeah, it's not from the board, but it's from the annex here. Yeah, I liked frankly, I'm excited that you're exploring this really, to be honest, from the perspective, that larger perspective. I'm excited about the interviews, and I think one thing to focus on, if you can, is on what are the constraints that they have, because something we see is that, and Rachel and I were just talking about this, how the available parcels for things are not the ideal parcels for things. So sometimes your design constraints are not perfect for the best case return on investment, but at least you can do something. So I think hearing about constraints from the agencies would be very helpful to understand how to move forward.
Thank you, Lisa Marie. All right, but I think I have scanned everybody and I don't see any more raised hands. Do we have any public comment? Deirdre?
Yeah, so this is something I was involved in during the pandemic. I was able to attend a regional workshop by the UN Disaster Risk Reduction members on the Sendai framework and climate adaptation. And I think I have been trying to push for using the Sendai framework in California, and specifically, really understanding what the risks are and what you're addressing with the proposed adaptation solutions. And one of the things I saw is there's a lot of hand-waving and rose-colored glasses about flood risk reduction. I was kind of had a front row seat when some environmental groups were trying to get a $40 million earmark in the climate bond for a habitat restoration project on the San Joaquin River. And there was a lot of hand waving about how it would reduce flood risk for Stockton. But the amount of land that you can buy for 40 million is just too small. You need to buy a staggering amount of acreage to be able to inundate it. And if you talk to the Stockton managers, they kind of have hidden somewhere plans of which levees they would breach if they really were that close. But when there was prolonged high water in 2023, they were having to patrol the levees because the levees in Stockton just leak. They have seepage. They know they need grout curtains. And during prolonged high water, they're at a great risk. The Army Corps of Engineers gave them a big chance of overtopping, and that's even without, sagging and overtopping, and that's even without sea level rise. So this is a case where the public perception of the efficacy is much different than if you actually do the modeling. So, thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Deidre. Peter?
Actually, could I just ask a question? You mentioned the framework with a name associated with it. Could you just tell us what?
Sendai, S-E-N-D-A-I. Okay. UC Davis is a signatory. It's Sendai, S-E-N-D-A-I. And I can send you guys my slides from the presentation on cascading and intersecting risks. But UC Davis is a signatory, and the US is also a signatory to the Sendai framework. I think it's a really good framework, and it kind of centers on modeling of disaster impacts and saving lives as well as other metrics. And I've advocated strongly for having lives saved to be one of the metrics that California considers in climate investments. And it's a surprisingly difficult lift. I didn't mention it at the symposium, and I got pushed back from the Nature Conservancy. Thank you.
All right. Okay, any more? So do we have any public comments for matters that are not on the agenda?
Deirdre?
So taking advantage of the fact that I'm actually here in person, your Emerging Climate Symposium synthesis cites the OEHHA numbers for 1.4 degrees C average increase in temperature in California watersheds. And that's the linear projection. The nonlinear projections are 50% higher. And I got 2C to 2.1C in Sacramento watersheds. I've got it for all the NOAA climate divisions. And they're, I think it's higher in Southern California and particularly in the inland desert. And that whole approach was just validated. A paper came out by Stefan Ramsdorf and Grant Foster. Ramsdorf is well known for his work, seminal work on the AMOC. And they found that there had indeed been an acceleration in warming in around 2013 to 14, and I found a Rodionov change point in California around 2012. I think it's associated with a change point in the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. So it's getting warmer in the ocean, and it's
we can
being
tell.
reflected. So anyway, I just want to put that out there. My dissertation research was on nonlinear dynamics and chaos theory. I worked with, well, actually, I did a year with Doan Farmer's research group, and so I was like, you need to not just look at linear trends. It's a nonlinear system, and it looks like the forcing is getting strong enough that we're seeing acceleration.
All right.
Thanks.
Well, thanks for that, Deidre, even though it's really disconcerting, is the word, I guess. All right. I don't think we have any other comments, do we, Edmund?
Yeah, no additional public comments.
All right. Well, then, all that is left to discuss or present is the preparation for upcoming Delta ISB meetings and items for follow-up, and I'll hand over to you for that.
Today we had a few members provide new declarations. First, both Tanya and Lisa mentioned that they have been asked by California Sea Grant to be an external reviewer of the Delta Extension Fellowship. Steve Lindley disclosed he's part of the review group and advisory board for the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. And then Lisa also disclosed that she's an external reviewer for the National Academy of Science on the National Assessment of the Nature Record. Other follow-up items. Today, Dr. Wener provided an update on the leadership. Dr. McKnight will soon be stepping up as chair. That means we need to hold an election for chair-elect soon. If you're interested in learning more about what that entails and how to get nominated, talk to the chairship. For today, there was also discussion about the draft summary for the Emerging Climate Symposium. Written comments are due to staff by April 6th. Your review should focus on if there's any additional material to include. Does it provide a good summary? And is there a right balance and level of detail among all the sections? There will be a more detailed discussion at the April 1st meeting. In addition, there were a lot of great brainstorming of the nature-based solution review. One of the ideas being proposed is to do some sort of webinar series. Dr. Goodwin today provided a list of some of the initial efforts that we're aware of that occurred in 2026. If ISB members are aware of additional more synthesis efforts, either locally or nationally, please feel free to send those to staff. In terms of future meetings, our next one is very soon on April 1st, not a joke. And the reason for that was just to accommodate all the different schedules of board members. And some of the items that we have for that agenda, we're going to get a Delta lead scientist report and get an update from the science program of how they're addressing comments from the ISB on the Delta Science Plan. And then Stephanie Fong from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife will provide a presentation on the Interagency Ecological Program, its relation to contaminants, and along with like an overview of the regulatory landscape. This presentation is intended to help inform the contaminants monitoring review. So following that will be the in-person meeting from May 21st to 22nd. May 21st will be the tour of the Echo Water Resource Recovery Facility. And following that will be an in-person meeting at the California Natural Resources Agency, and we'll loop you in on the agenda in April. That's all I have for this month's report. And do I see public comments? No, that concludes my report. Oh, sorry. Let me get
a lit site, particularly about the simulation of what it would look like if we had a return of the Renaissance mega drought. I wanted to send. So do I just send that as a public comment? Are you taking public comments on the draft review? Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, that is actually a question in my mind. Are we asking for public comments on the synthesis of the workshop, or?
Yeah, so it's part of the meeting package. So although we're not formally opening it up for public comments, it's available online, and we're welcoming comments. Down the line, we'll probably do a more formal review after the board, or more formal public comment process after the board has weighed in on the first draft. But the board does welcome early comments.
Okay. So, thank you very much for that.
Yeah, and sorry, that was a very long answer to yes.
No, it's good, it's good. Yeah. Okay, in that case, I adjourn the meeting, and thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you all.